Hey guys, what's up? I hope you're doing well. I want to come on and share something that I think is so important for me to throw into this space. This is a much bigger conversation, and it's a very nuanced conversation. And it's one that I've actually been having on this page for a while now. And many of you who have been with me, you've probably seen me explore all kinds of different nuances and perspectives, specifically around like integration, good versus evil, maybe some of like the Abrahamic religions, the non-duality, Gnosticism, mysticism. And you know, one of the things I think that's come to my attention, this is really the thing I came on to share, and like I said, this is a much deeper conversation, but I want to say first off that I actually see the value in both perspectives, both in the non-dualistic kind of Gnostic tradition that says basically evil is something that we created post these sort of Abrahamic control religions, that this was not really the original Essene or Cathar manuals. This was not originally even the Christ way. And what they're saying is that once this started to come in, it also started canceling out all of these other perspectives, and it became very black and white. And I think even today we see a lot of the fallout of that, of people trying to come to terms within themselves of how much of this is happening outside of me, how much of this is happening inside of me, and finding a way, like their place kind of on that spectrum. And I can really see the value in a non-dualistic approach where we see, okay, we are all coming from this unified field, and within that we have sort of ascending impulses or descending impulses, or we could say we have unifying impulses, love, or basically the absence of love. When I look at the physical world around me, those are the two things that I see. I see either love, which is, and I talked about this in the last live that I did about love and evil, which is to understand something, to be able to take that as a part of yourself. And that is a form of integration, but these are why this is such a nuanced topic, because when we talk about integration and we're stuck in a dualistic perspective, we're going to assume that means I'm literally going to take that sort of raw behavior, which is a byproduct of a lack of love, and that's what I'm going to unify with. But that's not what's happening. There's an alchemical process that takes place. Now, this becomes complicated when we're dealing with other beings in a fragmented field, which is also part of a unified field, and those individual fragments also have free will and can actually act against the larger body here, right? And so many of us are aware of how we ourselves have been trapped in these narcissistic bubbles. And what creates that narcissistic bubble? What creates those behaviors where we can actually act in opposition to another being, even if that being is a part of ourselves? What creates that? Needs not being met, a lack of love, a lack of understanding, a lack of connection. And so this is what I'm trying to explain, is that what I notice with people, especially who have maybe adopted some of a more traditional Christian approach, like you can watch people on this plane and you can go, okay, we even now have evidence that like serial killers, they're not born that way, that this is something that's created. This is created through trauma and brain damage, and the combination of those two things make very dangerous outcomes. And there's also very deeper spiritual reasons as to why we have people on this planet murdering each other. You know, what is happening at a collective level? What is happening at an individual level? But okay, let me keep my train of thought here. So there's a distinction that gets made between the physical and the non-physical. That, okay, people can get on board and say those behaviors, those, we'll call them separation behaviors, they seem like separation behaviors on the surface, but that's what's so complicated about this, because even somebody murdering another person is actually an attempt at closeness and connection. Because in that moment, you know, they are sharing the same reality as you. If you can do that to another person, there's pain inside of you. And in that moment, you share a reality. That's a form of connection. So even what we're calling, you know, these acts, these are created from a lack of connection. But anything anybody is ever doing is only trying to get them to feel better, trying to get them to feel relief, closer. So we can say that, we can acknowledge that that's what creates a force that would act seemingly against the larger whole. That is something that is the byproduct of abuse, of separation. We can't somehow, it seems like there's like a hard time for people to make the jump between that and non-physical, because it's like, well, wait. You know, those are bad beings, right? They're higher dimensional, because some of them are higher dimensional. I mean, and that's why we have to have discernment, because we are dealing with beings who are very fragmented, and they're operating at a higher, at a lower density, but at a higher, you get what I'm trying to say. So it is important to be aware of that. However, what is the mechanism that creates that? Because when I zoom out far enough, what it looks like to me is that what's happening on Earth is just one fucking example of God itself in the process of coming back to itself. So I think it can become kind of dangerous to really, you know, just go, that's evil, that's bad, let's get that as far away from us as possible. Because I know what creates that in a human being. And I would never do that to like a client. Like, that's not the healing experience for people, to turn against themselves even more. And it's so nuanced, because again, I really see the value of both perspectives, because the value of looking at it in a somewhat dualistic way is that we're acknowledging that while yes, it exists inside of us, it does also exist outside of us. And we are in individual bodies. And in that process of being in individual bodies, we also have to learn how to interact with aspects of ourselves that are not taking us as a part of themselves. And that's a very nuanced thing, right? Because again, that integration with that may not look like in the physical world what you think it's going to look like at a larger level. But you choosing to align yourself with something that is taking your best interest into consideration is you moving into a frequency of love. And you can hold your hand and say, you know, that's a boundary. I don't need to let that in for me. But that's a very different energy than repression, rejection, demonization, right? Because the problem with creating monsters is that we're not actually seeing the thing that's behind that. You know, we have these this big evil scary monster, but when you really understand what that is, it also ceases to have power over you. And then you're even more likely to be able to master that and move from a place of maybe from your heart, more led by the heart. So honestly, that was way more than I was planning on saying in the first place. But yeah, it's just interesting to me because trauma recovery and everything, it's like, but this spirituality became such a huge part of my life. And I know so many of you guys, I mean, it's life, it's everything. There's nothing that's not spiritual. And a lot of you guys I know are on this path too. And a lot of you guys think about these things. I guess if I had a hope or a wish, it would be to bridge the gap between these two perspectives that I'm seeing emerging, because they're not actually that different. And I think that if we start to split hairs, listen, I know that the individuation, whatever, it's all a part of it. I know people are going to split off into their groups. There's nothing I can do to stop that. But I'm trying to understand the value in both of these and kind of bridge the gap and see, like, maybe we're not actually thinking about this so differently. Maybe these are just some little things that we can tweak. And, you know, if you're anything like me, then maybe you're somebody who wants to be able to hold both so that you can actually relate to people in both perspectives. And again, like, I see the value that that might have for one person to completely go down a more traditional path. We'll say like a more traditional, even if it's not like in the Abrahamic religion sense, but I can understand that. I can understand how that kind of bifurcation is helping them to purify from within themselves. And I can see how on the other side, which is probably more where I lean, to start to kind of see maybe the larger universal perspective that's going on here, that this isn't necessarily good versus evil, that this is a much larger process of integration with a vast body of consciousness that has split so much. And there's that's very beautiful because we get to experience this. And it also creates a lot of challenge, right? Because like I said, all of those fractals have free will, and they also are all trying to figure out who and what they are. And then we bump up against each other because we're sharing a different perspective. But I think that that's useful. And then if we can see as many of those different perspectives as possible, we might be able to get a sense of what's really going on here. So happy to be a part of adding to this conversation. And yeah, if you guys have any thoughts about this, I'd love to hear them. And, you know, leave a comment. I'm only on here because my 10 o'clock didn't show up. I wasn't even supposed to be available right now. So all divine timing. I'm just waving to some of you guys. All right. Be well. And I will see you